My name is Jerome Ferry. My cameraman is Alan Eggers. We're doing a part 1 of 2 video interview with Marjorie Kopecek Nejdl, a lifelong Cedar Rapidian with a rich Czech heritage. Marge, tell us when and where you were born.
I was born here in Cedar Rapids in 1936.
What was your dad's name?
My dad's Charles Kopecek.
And your mother?
And my mother, Helen Kopecek.
Mm-hmm. And what was your mother's maiden name?
Kroupa. K-R-O-U-P-A. Yeah.
What's the meaning? Is there a meaning for Kopecek?
Kopecek means a little hill, and Kroupa, there's 2 different meanings in the way you pronounce it. One is meaning hail, and the other is sort of a grain like a barley.
Mm-hmm. And of course, this is Czech nationality. From Bohemia or Czechoslovakia or
yes, my father was born in Novi Dvori, and it's near the Moravian border in Czech. But my mother was born here in Cedar Rapids, and then she was raised in Czechoslovakia. Her mother died when she was at a very young age, and they went back to the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia. So she was raised there in Czechoslovakia, and she came back with her brother to the United States before she was 18 because they didn't want to lose their American citizenship.
Mm-hmm. Maybe we could show a picture of your mother. This picture, is this your mother and her dad? And
her brother. And I'm thinking this picture was taken just before they went back to the Czech Republic, Czechoslovakia. Originally, my grandfather came to this country in 1902 with 6 children and his wife and his mother-in-law. And he was a blacksmith. They lived in Solon, and as it turned out, he had about 5 wives, and I don't even want to tell you what my cousin calls him.
Tell us.
He calls him Humpy Kroupa because they ended up with 6 children and 6 well, my mother had 6, let me take that back. He came over with the 6 children, then he had 2 more children and went to Texas and divorced that wife, and then married my grandmother and had 2 more children. So these are the 2 youngest out of about 12 out of the family.
Did you ever hear down through the years as to why they immigrated at at the time they did? Was there some type of a rebellion going on over there, or?
I'm not sure about the rebellion, but he was promised a job here as a blacksmith. And so that's how he ended up in Solon and they lived there. And
have you been to Solon lately? Is that blacksmith shop still there, possibly on Main Street?
I never did pursue that, but that's a good thing. I might do that.
Because there's an old brick building right on Main Street that I think it used to be a blacksmith shop.
That's right. I never put the connection.
Well, anyway, and then the photo on your right, this is
my father and his family. They came over to the United States in 1920. My grandfather came in 1990, promised from a friend through a friend. He was promised a job, and he went to Nebraska. Now, how he came back to Cedar Rapids, I don't know. But my grandmother and my father and my 2 aunts came over in 1920, and my father was 12 years old at the time. A little story about when they came over. They came through the Ellis Island, and my father was a skinny, scroungy little thing, and so the doctors took him over and examined him, and when they brought him back, they had a little tag on there that said okay, and of course my grandmother and my aunts didn't know what that is, so they're trying to spit on that tag, trying to erase it because they were afraid they were going to send my father back. And then they purchased a lunch, and that was the first time that they had bananas. And my aunt says she couldn't figure out why anybody would want a banana. They tasted terrible. Well, nobody told them to peel them first, so they were eating the peelings and the banana all together.
Did he ever mention if they fumigated any of the people coming off the boats?
Not fumigated,
Or
but they did.
dusted them?
Yes, they did dust them.
And of course, they were all checked out for sickness and everything.
Yes,
like that.
yes. And my grandfather on my father's side was a mason. And he was supposed to have a job here. And how, like I say, I don't remember how they came back to Cedar Rapids from Nebraska, but he ended up working at Sinclair then, meatpacking place.
Did he have any memories of the boat ride coming over here? Or?
No, my father really didn't talk a lot about it. My aunt did more than he did.
How did they get to Cedar Rapids?
By train. They took a train from New York, and that's where they had their sack lunch with the banana.
And did your dad have a job?
No, he was only 12 at the time.
Okay.
And
okay.
so he...
Yeah. And then where did they first live?
They first lived, well, in fact, on the street right across the river from the museum is where they lived.
Were they able to speak English?
No. But they did learn the language because they had to get the jobs. And of course my dad was still going to school, but my two aunts, instead of going to school, they were farmed out as housemates and worked as housemates.
Mm-hmm. And then when he got older, your dad, when he got older, then he went to work for the Wilson Company?
Yes,
Mm-hmm.
Sinclair, and that's where my mother was working then when she came back, and that's where they met.
Mm-hmm. Marge, were the Czech people, did they ever mention anything about being discriminated against, or were they a very respected type of?
There was discrimination, and they tell me that my father was in many fights because they always called him a greenhorn. And from the skinny, scroungy little kid, he grew up to be a big, strapping guy. And I understand there were a lot of fights in the back alley.
Where do you suppose that come from in the Cedar Rapids area?
That's strange because there were so many Czechs and not as many Slovaks, but a lot of Czechs in Cedar Rapids that it became that way. Maybe they were. Bottom line, I think they were respected because they were hardworking people and they kept their yards and their homes and learned the language so that they could find the jobs. And I think they were really respected in the long run.
Your dad joined the Navy, didn't he?
Well, he didn't join. He was enlisted when he was 38 years old into the Navy in World War II. And I can still remember him coming home on leave when his father died. And he was the butcher in the Navy.
Did he ever mention Pearl Harbor, or do you have any memories of Pearl Harbor yourself?
I have memories of when it all happened, very, very dim memories. At first, when my father first tried to enlist, they wouldn't take him because he had flat feet. But then when they started getting desperate and he was 38 years old, they took him into the Navy.
And then after he got out of service, did he go back to Wilson's? Or?
No, my uncle was the owner of Paulina's Meat Market, and that was my aunt, his sister. And so he started working down at the meat market, and then he was taken in as partner later on.
Was what were they known? Were they known for any specialty meats?
They made their own salamis and bologna, and of course the wieners, and they had 5 stores originally, and made all their meats from their own old world recipes.
Mm-hmm. Were there other meat stores or butcher shops on 16th Avenue at that time?
Yes, there were 3 others besides Paulina's. 2 others besides Paulina's.
You remember the names of them?
One was Dusak's, and the other one was called 16th Avenue Meat Market.
So where did you go to grade school?
I went to Hayes School, which is no longer there, but Hayes Grade School and then Wilson High School.
Did your family speak English when you were, or speak Czech in the house?
Yes,
at
I
home?
didn't speak English until I started school. And as I recall, there were about 5 other boys that could not speak English, and I must have picked it up quicker than they did. And so I remember helping them with their language.
With the teachers, did they take this into consideration, or did you just kind of have to stumble
No,
along?
you know, they were very kind. They really did take us into consideration and helped us as much as they could.
Let's talk about some of your growing-up memories. I imagine a lot of your life centered around 16th Avenue.
Yes, it did, since my father worked there. And then when my father was taken in as a partner, Mother also worked there. And I just remember the stores that we shopped there.
Was your folks church-going people that?
No, not at first. Well, I should say that when my mother and her brother came back to Cedar Rapids, they did go to a Catholic church because they were Catholic, and sat down and must have sat in somebody else's pew, and they were told they couldn't sit there. So my uncle said, well, if I can't sit where I want to, then I'm just not coming. And so they didn't really get back into the church until I was about 12.
That must have been in the days when people paid pew rent.
Yes, yes.
And they felt the pew belonged to them because they were paying rent. Do you remember any Czech traditions that carried on your family, like at Christmas time, or what was your main course or your?
Well, at Christmas Eve, we always had the fish. There's a story about the carp, and my mother made carp. I'm sorry I didn't learn from her, because she did it somehow that there weren't any bones, but we always had carp on Christmas Eve. And then Christmas Day we had duck and goose, and of course the dumplings and sauerkraut and all the Czech pastries and babovkas and strudels.
Now the carp, would they have come from the Cedar River, or would they have been purchased someplace?
I think they were purchased from around somewhere down on the avenue, because I'm sure we weren't the only ones that had the carp.
Your dad's meat market where he worked, did they handle fish? Or
Yes,
just,
they did.
They did?
They did.
Memorial Day, was there anything special about Memorial Day?
Memorial Day, we had services always at the cemetery, and I can remember marching from the Sokol Hall they started, and then picked up people at the CSPS Hall, and then marched up the hill to the services at the Czech National Cemetery.
Would the children dress up in?
That's when I first had my costume. Was my mother made a Czech costume for me, and wore that for the. And I tried to find a picture, and I know I have one somewhere, and I still recall that not very vividly, but I remember that I was tired by the time we got up that hill.
Did you save the costume?
Yes, and my granddaughter's been wearing it.
You said your mother made this dress.
She made that for me, and now my granddaughter's been wearing it, and I think that this might be her last year for that. And she says, Bubby, you're just going to have to make me a new one, so I guess I'm going to have to.
Now, would all the little girls be dressed up in something similar?
Similar, yes. They were all handmade, and so everybody did their own input into them.
I imagine a lot of the Czech ladies were very good at doing seamstress type work.
Yes. Most of them did their own sewing.
This picture here, your granddaughter, when was that? How long ago?
This was taken this May at Hobie Days. Mm-hmm. And I'm afraid this is probably going to be her last showing in that dress.
You'll have to wait for a great-grandchild.
Poor Tommy, my grandson, though, I'm going to have to make him a costume because he's being left out. And I do have a costume for him when he gets a little older that was his daddy's that I made when Philip was younger.
The little boys would wear a costume
yes,
too on Memorial Day.
Yes.
4th of July, any special memories?
No, outside of family picnics, but nothing traditional.
Mm-hmm. There was a club, the Sokol Club.
It's an organization that originated in Czechoslovakia. It was originated because, the Czech country was always being fought after, and the founders were preparing to become independent country, and they figured that they needed to have the people in sound mind and a healthy body. And so the Sokol organization was founded for just that purpose, and it was for the whole family. And it became more of a gymnastic organization than it came to the United States.
Was this, and did the families have to pay dues?
Yes. There are two different Sokol organizations, and one is a fraternal one where they did have an insurance where they paid dues, but here in Cedar Rapids, it was just an organization for physical fitness.
Now, the young people, or anybody belonging to the Sokol Club, was there different units that they would compete against each
Yes.
other?
Our Cedar Rapids organization is part of the Western District, and headquarters are in Omaha, Nebraska. But there are Sokol organizations throughout the United States, and in fact, throughout the whole world now, because during communist time, the Sokols were banned because they represented freedom, and so they, in the Czech Republic and Slovakia, they did not participate.
This group that you belonged to and that you competed with, did that have a name?
Outside of Sokols, no.
You had mentioned the word Slets.
Oh, slit. That part of the program is the culmination of the gymnastics and competitions, and then they would have the mass calisthenic groups done with music and different age groups. And that was it was more of a festival.
Was that, what's the meaning of that word?
Slet meaning festival, a gathering.
Were the men quite active in this?
Originally, it was only men that could belong, and then later on the women sort of took over, but it was a family thing.
This probably, for the women, this would probably have been an occasion for them to get together and to socialize and...
It did that, yes.
And
it did
also
that.
exercise.
Exercising.
Yeah. Was this mostly Czech people, or could anybody belong?
Originally, it was mostly Czech people, and then they did, anybody could join them.
CSPS.
Czechoslovak, I looked that up. It's now Czech. Now it's called CSA, but CSPS, that was a fraternal organization, mainly because the founding fathers figured that they needed an insurance of some kind, and so that's when it was originally started in St. Louis, and now we have them all over the United States, and from that branched off the Western Fraternal, which was ECBJ at the time, because of course they didn't always agree on everything.
So to sell insurance, they were almost guaranteed clients.
Yes. Yeah.
To sell insurance, because that was probably impressed on everybody's mind. You had to have joined this club, and you had to have insurance,
And the whole gambit.
Did they have parties and dances other
Yes,
than
they
exercising?
They had, of course, Shibzinki was one of the biggest things, and that's before the Mardi Gras. It was a masquerade dance and party. But they had the apron dances and pork and dumpling suppers and different fundraisers that they had.
What was the apron dances?
Apron dances.
Your fanciest apron?
That was before my time, really. It was just a gathering of women because the men were always working and didn't go to some of the social things, so it was a chance for the women to get together, and they'd have dances and they'd come in their aprons.
They would make very fancy
Some
aprons.
did, some had just the plain aprons, as I understand it. But I can remember going to different functions and dances at the CSPS Hall with my folks, and of course the kids would always sit up on the balcony and watch down, and we used to have one little sort of an imp that did throwing things down at everybody.
Was the park along the river, was that an active?
The park along the river was Western Fraternals, ECBJ's park, and we did have picnics there. Of course, most of the families in around this area belong to both the Western Fraternal and the CSA one, and so they had the family picnics and parties out at the park.
Your mother, was she a good cook?
very good. But I understand when she first got married, she couldn't even make the coffee. But she turned out to be a very good cook.
You remember your dad's favorite dishes? Your favorite dishes of your mother's?
I guess maybe my favorite were always the potato dumplings and sauerkraut and pork. But anything she seemed to make, and I can remember that now when I do tours for the kids at the village and we talk about pig's tail and pig ears and everything, she used to make a very good dish out of pig ears and pig tails and baked beans and
Pickled pig's feet, probably.
That was not one of my favorites, but they did have them, yes.
I can imagine the meat market where your dad worked. They probably sold all of these.
They still do. They still do sell the pig ears and pigtails. Of course, not as much as they used to. But one of the lunch meats that they make was a head cheese or a souse, and as I understand it, that's still one of the favorites.
Was your mother good at baking kolaches?
Very good. She baked kolaches and strudels and all kinds of pastries. Christmas time. Oh, I can remember coming home from school and the aroma, and of course couldn't touch because she was packing and putting things up, and she'd have them in boxes up in the attic because it was cold up there, and I'd always sneak up there to go pick out my favorite cookies.
Did she bake her own bread?
Not as much as, no. Ed's mother always baked her own bread, but my mother didn't bake the bread as often.
Did she pass on the kolach baking finesse to you?
Well, she did, but my husband took over doing the kolaches. After my mother passed away, he says at Christmas time, well, how are we going to have the strudel and the babovka and all of this? I said, well, I'll tell you what, Ed. I'll do the babovka if you do the strudel and the rest of it. And he did. And that was his job. At Christmas time, I did the babovkas and the cookies, and he did the strudels and the kolaches.
Was there any Czech festivals like in the fall of the year or the...
Not when I was young, but later on when the 16th Avenue started to be a corporation into Czech Village, they did have festivals in the fall and in the spring.
Did you ever work in the meat market with your dad?
Yes, I did. I worked as a cashier, and they used to have a little booth in there where the cashier sat. And my mother did that, and then when I became old enough to do this, then that was my job on weekends and after schools. And then when I was going to school in Chicago, I'd come home on weekends and work there.
You were telling me about a Barbara's drugstore that...
There was a drugstore that I think they were the first ones to have the frosted milkshakes. And Sundays, my uncle, Martin Bolena, he'd go down there to have his Alka-Seltzers. And we'd go, and my cousin and I, we'd have our milkshakes, our frosted milkshakes.
What was the Alka-Seltzer because of all the fun he had the night before? Or?
I don't know. I don't remember. I just remember that he always had an Alka-Seltzer. Could be.
When you were young, was 16th Avenue still a very bustling,
yes, it was.
Busy place?
Yes, it was. Especially on Saturdays when the farmers would come in to get their groceries and everything. It was, and everybody knew everybody, and it was one big happy family.
When you were a young girl, were they having Hobie days?
No.
That's not a old custom then, Hobie days.
No, not really, but it became popular then later on.
Mm-hmm. What did Hobie mean?
Mushroom.
Okay. St. Joseph's Day, was that a...
St. Joseph's Day was mainly celebrated among the churches and the people themselves. We didn't have a festival until the 16th Avenue became Czech Village.
Was there a Bohemian Day?
Not that I recall.
Okay. High school. Where'd you go to high school?
I went to Wilson. It was not too far from where we lived, and of course I walked to both when I was in grade school, Hayes School, and then Wilson also. But I was active. I was active in sports and the theater. I guess.
What's the sports? What type of sports?
Well, mainly it was girls GAA, and we had basketball, baseball, and volleyball.
What years did you graduate?
In 55. I was one of those January that I could either go forward or back because they quit having the January graduation. So I stayed back and lollygagged around that last year and worked down at the meat market.
When you graduated, did you have any idea at that age what you wanted to do or thought you might like to do with your life?
I wanted to. I went to commercial art school afterwards. My father wanted me to be a teacher. He did not want me to go to art school, but he finally relented. My mother talked him into it, and so I did attend a commercial art school in Chicago, and also courses through the Chicago Art Institute.
That must have been quite a cultural shock from you from going from
Oh,
16th.
it was. Mother went with me to Chicago, and of course we had a dorm room, and it was right on Lakeshore Drive. Now there are those high-rise apartments right there, but my room was not too clean, kind of dingy, and Mother looked at it and she says, "Well, you're not staying here." I said, "Well, Mother, we have to. We've already paid the tuition and the dorm rent and everything." And I had a roommate from Michigan, and we became good friends. So she and I took the desk, and we would scrub the walls as far as we could reach, and we threw out the carpeting because there were silverfish in it, and they couldn't figure out why we were doing that. But so we had a two-tone room as far as we could scrub. It was clean, and the rest was kind of a dingy green.
Did you get to go around and look at any of the
Yes,
museums?
we did. We did a lot of walk on weekends when I wasn't back here working. Why we did a lot of sightseeing.
Grant Park and the planetarium.
Yes, and we walked everywhere. Now you think about it, there's no way that you could walk to those places. I can remember
You
walking
did run over it.
to this train station over the Canal Bridge, and we'd stumble all over the winos that were laying on. We just kept on walking and going.
Coming back and forth from Cedar Rapids, did you go by train?
By train. Mhm.
I imagine after a while, after you lived in Chicago a while, you start feeling quite sophisticated.
Well, I certainly did.
That was quite an education, really.
Yes, it
for you,
was. Yes,
living
it
in
was.
a large city like that.
And then when I didn't come afterwards, when it was becoming too much to be coming back to Cedar Rapids on weekends, I did find a job in Berwyn, and I did some paintings there.
What?
One was a travel agency shop, and the other one was a dress shop that I just worked at.
You would do the artwork for them?
I did the artwork for the travel agency, but at the was a women's dress wear. I was just a sales lady. I didn't like it, but it was a job.
How long did you stay in Chicago?
2 years.
And then, had you met a boy yet?
Well, I met Ed before I went to Chicago, and
What did Ed think about you going to Chicago?
he wasn't happy about it. But he did some train traveling too. The first time he came to see me, we were going to go to the new car show, and it was at the Navy Pier. And I said, "Well, that's not too far from the dorm, Ed. We can walk." I was thinking saving cab fare or bus fare or whatever. And so we walked, and he had a new pair of shoes on by the time we got to the Navy Pier. He had such blisters on his feet. He was going to take his shoes off and go barefoot, and I wouldn't let him. He says, "You'll never listen to me for that again."
Did he have a job at that time?
Yes, he worked, Diamond V Mills, and he also had a truck that he had a truck route to collect. It was more or less trash, like boards and paper products and that. So he had 2 jobs.
Then later on, what did he...
Shortly after we were married, there used to be a roundhouse down on the flats, and one of the fellows came over and we lived on the flats the first couple of years, and one of the fellows came over and asked if he would work at the roundhouse while the fellows were vacationing, and so he got into on the railroad that way.
You might explain where the flats are. Some people watching this won't know.
That's true. The flats were down there on 16th Avenue Southeast, right, I would say, east of Wilson's Packing Plant. in there. In fact, that's where my mother was born, up on Oak Hill behind there, behind the flats. And that's where she was born. And then when they came back, then they were no longer there.
Did they live in houses? I don't think they were provided by Wilsons, but
No, they were not provided.
they
by
weren't in
Wilsons.
that.
But he, as I understand, Sinclair, when the immigrants first came, he did help them find homes. But they were not. Anyway, my parents and grandparents, it was not owned by them.
The children. Did you and Ed have any children?
Yes, we have 2 boys. Charles, Chuck, now is 43, and Philip now is 40. And he was so proud of those boys. Oh, he just had a good time with them.
When you, as a family, your family, did you do a lot of outdoor activity?
We did camping, outdoor activity, yes. As you see, we live out here, and we just had a good time because Ed gardened then later on, and he loved to do that. But, oh, the boys learned to drive their cars in the field next door.
Did, when you would go camping, would Ed like to cook when you were camping? Or
We
was
shared that.
fishing?
He did mostly the fishing. Later on, after the kids were not with us camping, I think that's one of the things that I missed the most, doing the camping, because he would fish and I would paint. And it was so relaxing, and
For both of you?
Yes, for both of us.
Yeah. Where would you go? Where were some of your favorite places you'd go
I
camping?
think Ed's favorite place was probably Bailey's Ford, just south of Manchester, because they had trout streams there. We enjoyed just being out there.
You were telling me that you taught gymnastics.
Yes, through Suckles. I went to several instructors courses, and I taught gymnastics for over 25 years, starting with the little children and then the juniors and seniors. And it was a fun class. We had a lot of children, and at that time it wasn't specialized so much as it is now in gymnastics, but it was for everybody. And we had, I think, probably 40, 50 kids in the class, and divide them up into teams, and that gym was full. And I still teach a seniors class now.
So that still is a active group?
Yes, it
the
is.
Sokol.
Yes, it is.
And then along in the 70s, you picked up your lifelong hobby of egg art.
Of egg art. Well, I learned the egg art from my uncle, Martin, when I was a child, and I assumed everybody did their eggs this way. And then in 1972, when it started to become popular to be proud of your heritage, they were going to have a Czech festival here in Cedar Rapids. And my uncle was supposed to demonstrate, and at the time his health was failing him, so he volunteered me. And I wasn't doing the egg art at that time. So reluctantly I did get the dies and everything set up. And I'm so thankful that he got me started again, because it's been my life since.
Does the history of egg art, does that go back quite a ways?
Oh, yes. It's been recorded over 2,000 years ago that they had the egg art. And it was one way for the peasants in Czechoslovakia, in fact, to bring some artistry into their homes.
Would that be just the Czech and Bohemia people, or would that have been other nationalities that were?
There were, all through Eastern Europe, it's been recorded that they did the eggs.
Were there different styles for different countries?
Different regions had different methods of doing their egg decorating. You could tell what area the egg came from by the method that they used, because what was available for them, like through agricultural and industrial beeswax and different things.
Mm-hmm. There was an old world style of egg decorating.
With the beeswax and the dyes. That's one of the methods, and that's what I do.
What was the name of
Batiking, or wax resist method of egg decorating.
What was the proper name for decorated eggs?
For decorated eggs, it's called krasice. That's the Czech word. Now, Ukrainians call them pisanki. So everybody had their own method and name for their eggs.
Did you ever get the opportunity to go back to the old country?
Yes, I did. The first time I went back was in 1976 with my parents and my youngest son, Philip. And then again, and I went through mainly to visit my mother's relatives and also to a Sokol sled in Switzerland, because naturally they couldn't have one in the Czech Republic. And so then from there I took a bus to Switzerland and attended the Sokol sled.
Did you ever feel, did that art school in Chicago, do you feel that helped you in any way in this line of?
Well, I think it did help me some. I worked as a commercial artist for a few years after I was married, but I think that I've always had the knack of the Czech folk art, because I was always doodling, and scratches of paper never empty very long.
Yeah. Did you ever work with ceramics?
Yes, when I started doing this folk art and we were doing the ceramics, and Ed was my partner and everything. We did the ceramic mugs and painted on wood, and I did designs for aprons, and then we started attending some of these festivals, selling our wares. We always had all of our things had a Czech orientation to it.
Did you ever do what they would call reverse drawing on glass?
On glass, I did that for a while also.
Explain that a little bit.
Well, reverse drawing on glass is that you paint the back side first, drawing the back side of the glass. So naturally you have to put what is going to be on the outer part. How do I want to say that? Let's say the outlines would be first, and then your eyes, and if you're doing a face, then your eyes, and then the flesh color, because it's going to be shown from this side. So it was fun doing that. I did a few of them.
Whenever you tried to do anything, did you try to personalize it, your own little?
My own little. I start out. I should say that I probably gleaned a lot of designs and everything from the costumes and the embroideries that they do, but then I always add my own.
Yeah. What I was trying to say is some people would just copy it out of a book or something, but you always tried to add a little bit on your own.
Yes, yeah. I do add a lot of my own.
You got into greeting cards, didn't you?
Yes.
You want to hold up a couple that?
Some of the greeting cards, and they're not all. It was just whatever I decided I wanted to do, and they decided that they needed some greeting cards at the museum gift shop. Mm-hmm. And so this design is not solely Czech, but they do have a lot of things, and it's more of a Dutch blue onion pattern, but the Czechs do like it. So.
And you got
Christmas cards.
Mm-hmm. Very nice. What does that name in that heart stand for?
It's radost, meaning joy.
In a Christmas ornament?
At Christmas time now, we started doing this when we were in the old building, of personalizing ornaments. The museum has a lot of glass, hand-blown glass ornaments. And then for a fundraiser, what we started doing was painting a name and a date on it for $1 over the cost, or $2 over the cost of the ornament. And we've continued this for the last probably 15 years. And so it's a busy time at Christmas. I volunteer at the museum, and that's my volunteer part.
What's the little egg here? I know this has been your lifelong hobby, the little egg. And for people that may want to know, we did a special tape on your egg art. But this particular egg here...
This particular egg design I entered into the state fair this year. And on the back I have written that it's representing the communities, let me read it, representing approximately 30 major and minor Czech and Slovak communities of Iowa, because they wanted something to represent parts of Iowa. And I didn't think that I would win, but I did come in the top 5, but it's more of an ethnic It is an ethnic design, and I think they're looking for more of a corn and beans and cows and pig design.
I noticed the design on that egg is raised. Is that a particular method of?
That was, yes. I used to use flour and water to make a texture, but now they have a little texturizing. So there's about 4 different coats layered. You had to wait about 5 to 6 hours in between each layer to texturize it. So this was a fun egg, but it did take time.
Mm-hmm. The aprons laying here on the table, Marge, is this something that you
This
got
is
into too?
Just another
Just hold them up in front of the camera.
that says Dobre chutnání, good eating, or bon appetit. And this one says Bez práce nejsou koláče. Without work, no koláčes. Like no pain, no gain. And this one is Slepičí nudlové polivka je nejlepší. Chicken noodle soup is the best. Jestli můžeš dostat slepici, aby snězla nudle. If you can get the chicken to lay the noodles. But we did different. I got started after our festivals and everything. The museum curator at that time said, would I be willing to make some of these things for the museum gift shop? And so we got into sweatshirts and t-shirts and aprons and anything that I could paint on. It worked. One of the t-shirts that we had was Duck, Duck, Goose in Czech, but if you can see that the duck is goose and the goose. We had fun with this. Ed was my critic and my friend and my partner, and he always promised me an interesting life. He says, it might not be a rich life, but it's going to be an interesting life, and it certainly was, because Ed danced to his own drummer, and he tried, and he was never afraid to do anything, and so we had some interesting times.
Did he ever go back to the old country with you?
Yes, in 1990, we went back for another Sokol Slet and visited, and again in 94. And he vowed that he was going to spend his summers in Czech because he felt so at home there. And I said, I'm not staying there all summer. He says, well, you can send me my retirement checks and I'll stay there for a while.
You mentioned that could a person live comfortably over there at this time on your retirement check from the United States?
Well, we probably could live comfortably
I mean, is
over there, but
the cost of living cheaper over there?
compared to here, yes. But we wouldn't have all the comforts that we have here.
You were chosen to represent the Czech Folk Art Museum. Tell us that story.
In '96, I was chosen to represent the Czech community of Iowa because Iowa was having its sesquicentennial. I got that out. And the Smithsonian was celebrating its sesquicentennial. And so they chose 100 artists and people, not just only artists, but different people of different walks of life of Iowa, to be in the at the mall, the art festival at the mall
In Washington,
D.C.
Mm-hmm.
And the funny story about that, I might have told it before.
That's okay.
But when the lady came to interview me, Ed was baking strudel for the church festival, and so naturally he gave her a strudel, and he was chosen to represent the Czech baking and cooking at the time. And when they called back to tell us that we were chosen was on April 1st, and Ed wasn't home, so I left him a note. I went into town and said, Ed, we've been chosen to go to Washington, D.C. Hooray. And I came home, and he was home, and I said, aren't you excited? And he says, why, yeah, I know, it's April Fool joke. And I had a hard time convincing him that that was a fun time for us. We spent 2 weeks there.
You did, throughout your lifetime, you did a lot of interesting things through your hobby of egg art. Did he look up to you, respect you for this? Or
Yes.
did he just...
No, he encouraged it. Anything that I would try, he was my sole supporter and always wanted me to go a little further. if it wasn't for him, I probably wouldn't have gotten into all these things, because he enjoyed meeting people and doing these things. And,
Which made it so much easier for you,
oh, yes.
especially when he went along.
Yes. Oh, yes.
You were active in the Heritage Singers group, weren't
Yes.
you?
Yes. We're still active. Our group is getting smaller, but I joined mainly because I enjoyed singing these Czech folk songs that I learned as a child. And then we started to do some performances. I'm not real crazy about that, but I enjoy singing the Czech songs.
Yeah. Like where would you be asked to perform? Church groups?
Church groups and festivals and heritage and nursing homes, care centers. Our next one, I think, is going to be at the band concert in Czech Village. But we have a good time with it.
Do you dress up in Czech costumes?
Well, sometimes we do, and sometimes we just have the white tops and the red skirts, and the men have their little red vests. We're interested in finding some more men. Can you sing?
Yeah, I can sing, but I'm not Czech.
We'll teach you.
I'd have a hard time with the pronunciation. Were you active in the new Czech museum?
Yes, I was on the board from 1986 to 1996, and it was during this time when we were planning for the new building, which I never thought would be in my lifetime, so it was a very exciting time.
Are you still with?
I still
active
volunteer, yes. I do volunteer work at the museum.
Is there any Czech dance groups that,
That's what's a shame.
like the Heritage Singers?
No, we used to, through Sokols. I was active in the Czech folk dance group. We had a group that we did a lot of performances. And Ed never danced. I did have a dance partner, but he always attended. And when he wanted to dance, he'd had a few beers, and I didn't want to dance with him then. But we've been trying to get a dance group started here, and it just hasn't really come to it.
These aprons that you were showing us earlier. Now, what did you make these to sell or to give away? Or?
Mainly to sell. I did the designing, and then we have them silk screened, and they're mainly for the museum gift shop for selling.
What's the story behind this?
Well, in
Marge?
2001, Cedar Rapids had the mannequins overall celebrating Grant Wood, and if you remember, there were mannequins of all kinds in Cedar Rapids, and the museum asked me if I would do the museum Czech costume ones. And at the time, I thought it was to be painted, and so I had to submit the artwork, and that was fine. And I said, now, the man, are the overhauls imprinted on him? And she says, well, they're mannequins. And I said, oh, okay. Got in the car, and I said, Ed, stop the car. Mannequins? How am I going to paint a skirt on a mannequin? So we ended up making these costumes. It was quite a chore. This was our last project together, but I did all, wherever it looked like it was embroidered, I did all the painting on there. But we made the skirt and the apron, and my cousin helped me with the blouse, and I painted on the man's vest. I just made it out of felt. And the walking stick we had carved with the mushroom on the top, and it's difficult, you can't see that. But we spent probably 40 hours each, so 80 hours complete went into the work of the mannequins. But we did have a good time, and that was our last project together.
That is beautiful. Does the Czech Museum have a copy of this?
Not of this particular. This was something that my son had made for all of us
That
as
is
a
beautiful.
keepsake. And this is Philip and his family, and myself with the grandkids, and Ed and I, and then all of us except for Ed because he was ill at the time, with the mannequins. They stood under the clock tower. And it was purchased by the Village Bank on 12th Street Southeast, and he's going to have them up for display.
Great. Marge, tell us about some of the family in the pictures here.
Well, the first picture is my parents' wedding picture, my father and mother, and then The gentleman way on the end is her brother, Gus, the ones that came back with her from Europe, and his wife. And then the next one is a family picture of my father and mother and I when my dad was in the Navy. And the next two are my sons. They were in a wedding.
What's their names again?
Okay, the oldest one with the beard is Chuck, Charles, and the other one is Philip. And Chuck now is in construction, building homes. He and his wife are partners in it. And Philip is a fireman. And they're the ones that have the 3 grandchildren. And they now live in Brandon. And the next picture are my 2 sons and my daughter-in-laws. And they're more like my daughters than just daughter-in-laws, so I really enjoy my family. And my grandchildren, my goodness, they were such help for me. Ed passed away 2 years ago this month, August of 2001. And the grandchildren have been my life, helping me through everything. Emily is now 4. And Scott came into our lives when he was 10 years old, and he's now 17. And Tom he's a little imp. He's gonna be full of it. Ed was worried about Tom, that he was kind of laid back and he was just a baby when he passed away. And Tom is finding his own way now. He's 2.5. And here's a picture of the 3 together. Ed liked to cook, and we had a group that we still, visit. We have good times together, but we had a group that every fall we would rent a houseboat, and the men did all the work. Ed was the chef, we had a pilot, and we had one that did the cleanup and everything. The women sat around and played cribbage and visited and whatever we'd want to do. And we had such good times with that. We did that every year for about 10 years.
Would this have been up on the Mississippi?
On the Mississippi.
When the leaves were turning in the fall of the year?
Yes. We just had a good old time. And that's Ed with his chef's hat on. Early in the morning we were going through one of the locks and dams there.
Marge, did you try to instill your love of egg art into any of your grandchildren?
Yes, both my boys learned the method and know how, and I'm hoping that someday, that when they have more time, that they will take it up. And the grandchildren are pretty young yet, but I've got Emily drawing with marking pens on eggs, and so I'm hoping someday that they will take the egg art.
Marge, unless you have any other memories you want to share with us, the Cedar Rapids History Center, the Linn County Historical Society, would like to thank you very much for sharing your memories with us.
And I thank you. It's been fun.